Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to this regular council meeting for the Corporation Township of Puslinch on February 20th, 2019 at 7 p.m. We'll start with disclosure of pecuniary interests. Seeing none. Okay, moved by Councillor Goyda, seconded by Councillor Sapoulis, that council receives the confidential verbal report from Karen Landry, CAO clerk, regarding litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, with respect to an application for judicial review, Swastika Trail, and the council proceeds as directed. Does it staff proceed as directed? Staff proceeds as directed.
Well, or council, I guess, is the other council, the
Okay. Oh, I know again. And
legal counsel.
right. And a confidential report, ADM 2019-008, from Nina Lessick, Deputy Clerk, regarding personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, citizen appointments to advisory committees, and that the following committee appointments be made for the 2018-2022 term of council or until successors are appointed. Heritage Committee, Mary Tybee, John Arnold, John Levac, Barb Jefferson. Recreation Committee, June Williams, Vince Klimkos, Bruce Joy, Dinah Makeson. Planning and Development Advisory Committee, Dennis O'Connor, Dan Kennedy, Paul Sadra, and Deep Bazzi. All in favor? Carried. Moved by Councillor Sapoulis, seconded by Councillor Goyda, that the minutes of the following meetings be adopted as written and distributed. A, budget meeting January 30th, 2019. B, closed budget meeting January 30th, 2019. C, council meeting February 6th, 2019. D, closed council meeting February 6th, 2019. All in favor? Carried. Right. Communications, is that where we're at? Oh, business, sorry, I'm just 1 second. So, any business arising out of the minutes? Councillor Roth? Councillor Bulmer, anybody? No? Okay, public meetings, I don't see any on there. All right, communications, what's our first communication? We have the Puslinch Historical Society. Any questions or comments on that one? Councillor Bulmer?
Just one, I was informed this week that this organization lost another one of its longtime supporters and members in B. Woolsey, who had published some excellent work for that organization over the years. She and her sister were longtime supporters and part of this organization. Despite not living in the township, they had a long connection to this community. So I'm looking forward to attending this.
Councillor Goyda?
I would be open to going to this for sure.
Yeah, it'd be great to go.
I am currently scheduled to work, and as we didn't pass that procedural amendment bylaw, I cannot commit 100% to this. Working tomorrow, and I can check to see if I can change my schedule, and I'll
Just let us know.
let you know. Okay.
Excuse me?
Oh, Councillor
Are
Rowe.
we going to go before the meeting or after the council meeting?
I guess we'll do
should-
consensus.
Just suggesting afterwards, I think.
I think that would be better for myself, but
Yeah.
Okay, consensus to respond back as after the meeting? Okay. All right, the next one is the Claire Maltby Secondary Plan Project Update. Any questions or comments? Councillor Spillis?
Yes, I had a quick discussion with our CEO in this matter, and I understand the county planning is still involved, and I understand also that we're going to be getting a presentation as well.
Yes, so to answer yes, Sarah Wilhelm will be continuing with the project on the township's behalf, and we are working with the city of Guelph to arrange for them to make a presentation before council. And I think we're looking at May or June, if I recall correctly.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, next one is the monthly Mill Creek report. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, I was looking at the January report and compared it to this one, and I noticed that the threshold values have changed, and I'd like to understand why they change. I was wondering if the CEO can undertake a discussion with somebody on that matter.
We will follow up with them.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, so we'll move on to intergovernmental affairs. First one is the environmental registry. Any questions or comments?
I just
Councilor Rowe?
noticed they have given these permits for 10 years, so I guess our request for 5 is gone missing.
Yeah, it's dismissed, that's for sure. And Councilor Bulmer?
Yeah, it is interesting. You know, this is for one of the largest water taking permits in the township. It's 8 times what other people take on a daily basis, or I'm sorry, 4 times what other people take on a daily basis, and attracted only one response. I think ours was the only response to it, suggesting it be 5 years. So, you know, and we recognize there may not be any current impacts associated with this, but I am disappointed that, you know, as we mentioned before, for the Mill Creek operation, they're suggesting they'll be out of there in 2 or 3 years, so why they needed a 10-year water taking permit still eludes me, so.
Goida?
No, that's fine.
I'm fine. We'll just continue, I think, making our comment.
Yep.
Yeah, this line here, there's no technical rationale for issuing a permit for 5 years, and they base it on the fact that we didn't provide any rationale as to why we were asking for 5 years. So if in the future we ask for 5 years, Madam CEO, should we try to back that up with some rationale from a consultant to try to advocate for our ask? Or, I mean, they're just going to dismiss it every time.
I actually would have to perhaps maybe look at some of the members of council that have been here longer than I have, because I know since I have been here, I know that there was a long-standing resolution of council making the request that it's on a 5-year basis, but I don't know how council at the time arrived to that
Well, there
length
were,
of time, and if there was anything else that was in support of that perhaps I should look into.
Councillor Bulmer, do you have any?
I can't recall specifically, other than the fact that early on with some of these operations, when it was unknown what the impacts were going to be, whether it was this water taking or other water takings, especially early on until it was, the predicted results were verified, the township wasn't comfortable with longer-term water taking permits. But after that, I don't recall there was any technical reason other than if something crops up, it's nice to have them being shorter.
Yeah, so my suggestion going forward, if we're going to ask for a lesser period on a water taking, then we need to back it up with some
Yeah.
information. We just can't
Yeah.
just do an ask. So that would be if it comes up again. Okay, any other questions or comments on mine? All right, the next one is, again, St. Mary's. They received their 10-year water taking permit. Any questions or comments? Seeing none. All right, the next one is the Guelph public meeting notice, which has already been held. Any questions or comments?
No.
I have a question. We had requested a review of the traffic lights for our residents located on the east side of Victoria Road in light of this development coming through and causing more traffic and more difficulty for them to make left turns. I was wondering if there's any action on that part.
Yeah, I can let you know that I've had discussions with both Sarah Willem from the county and with GM Blue Plan with respect to this, and there will be information included on your next agenda with respect to council's concern in this regard.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Are we concerned about the urban-rural transition, even though it's a golf course across the street there? Because on Maltby Road, where we have concerns with this transition and this development, it's probably already cleared. Probably isn't any. Has there been any discussion on where we want to define our urban versus rural transition zone, per se? Madam CEO, has there been any, or?
I haven't heard anything further. I don't believe Sarah has at this time either.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? No? All right, we'll move on to the Hamilton Notice of Public Meeting. Any questions or comments on that one?
No.
Councilor Lewis?
No.
Okay. Scroll down. Next one is Heads of Council for Roma. This is the letter for the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Any questions or comments?
No.
Okay. Okay, I think that's it for
Is that it?
IG. All right. Moved by Councillor Goyda, seconded by Councillor Spoulos, that the intergovernmental affairs correspondence items listed on the council agenda for the February 20th, 2019 council meeting be received. All in favor? Carried. Reports. Moved by Counselor Sepulveda, seconded by Counselor Goya, that report FIR 2019-001 with respect to establishing and regulating bylaw for Puslinch Fire and Rescue Services be received for information, and the council passes a bylaw to repeal the previous establishing and regulating bylaw for Puslinch Fire and Rescue Services bylaw number 12/10 and replace it with bylaw attached to Schedule A to report FIR 2019-001. Any questions or comments on that one? Counselor Bulmer?
Yeah, I had a question, and I think, I believe the chief is in the audience, so perhaps
I can invite Chief
answer
Gomes
the-
down and
simple question, I hope.
Your Worship, members of council.
Evening, Chief Gomes. Interesting, I was reading in here, there's a note about, qualifications to be on the force, and one of them was living in the township or in close proximity to a fire, one of the township's fire halls. And I recall, I believe, in one of our previous job postings, I think we set that close proximity at 7 kilometers to this fire hall. How do we determine, how do you define how do you define close proximity, I guess?
We start off with a radius of 5 kilometers to the fire hall. And we look at the qualified applicants within that radius. And if we don't find enough qualified applicants within that 5 kilometer radius of our fire hall, then we start to expand the radius.
Very clever. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent answer.
Counselor Rowe?
Yes, thank you. I'm a little confused as to what the changes are in this new establishing and regulating bylaw. So for our response times in that, has that changed? Or is it the same as it was before?
Okay, so in regards to the response times, what is listed now mimics exactly what's listed in our master fire plan. And in regards to NFPA standard 1720, which is the one that applies to rural fire departments. And the objectives listed are listed as something that we would strive towards. So it's not something that we're listing that we shall meet, but definitely it's standard practice or best practice that we're trying to meet based on standards and information that we have, and that also provided by our consultant that did our master fire plan.
So it has changed then from what we had in our previous one? As far as the number of men and the time?
Previously, it wasn't even listed.
Oh, okay.
So yes, and that's why we're listing it now.
Okay. Now, we discussed this at budget time, and I just want to throw this out as far as maybe protecting the township for liability. A municipality is able to have more than one demand zone, and we can have what is called a remote area, which would mean that the area is greater than 8 miles from the fire station. And then in that case, you would have minimum staff responsive for, and response time is directly dependent on travel time. Now, I'm not saying we should strive to do that, but I'm
Right.
just wondering, is there any protection for the township if we did have a remote area demand zone, that if something did happen, the township wouldn't be as liable?
I guess that's something we could look at. When I think of remote demand zone, I think of more northern communities in Ontario, those that are a lot more sparse. So when we look at a demand zone right now, which is a rural demand zone of less than 500 citizens within a square mile, I think that's a good generality that we should keep when we strive to meet these objectives. So I would have safety concerns if we decided to bring down our response objective to a remote demand zone.
I'm not saying we should bring down our, what we're striving to do, but I'm just asking if we did, and the only criteria is that it's greater than 8 kilometers from the fire station. And I'm just asking the question if there would be less liability for the township.
Presently, I don't, I apologize for interrupting, but presently, I don't foresee this as a liability. These are standards that are set on an international basis that we try and meet and we strive for. And that's exactly the terminology that's written with the guidance of Madam CAO. We changed the terminology to state that it's not something that we must meet or shall meet. It's something we strive to do.
Okay. And when you talk about the core services, is 24 firefighters to high-risk occupancies. Can you tell me what a high-risk occupancy is in the township? Would we have those, or?
Sure. So that's was determined for our township through our community risk assessment that was done with our master fire plan. So when I look at, and sorry, I got a lot of documentation I brought just to hopefully answer all your questions, is when we look at high risk, we are looking at occupancies that are classified as institutional. So one good example of that would be Morrison Park Nursing Home, and that's high risk. And just due to the nature of the building and the occupants in there, that we require that amount of staff to assist. And as council is well aware, we utilize the assistance of neighboring municipalities, other fire departments to assist, and definitely we're prepared, and Hamilton's well aware that if we have a structure fire at Morrison Park Nursing Home, they're coming to assist, as well as Guelph Fire.
And just one other thing, 13.3, you talk about other persons present at a fire to assist in suppression and tearing down buildings, and I have a little bit of a concern with that as far as liability for the township as well. And are we covered for insurance if I'm watching you guys fight a fire and you say grab the end of the hose and I get hurt? What's the liability there for the township, and have we got insurance for that?
That's something we're addressing right now. Once again, I know Madam CAO has received some quotes from our insurance provider in that regards. I think they're very affordable quotes, but that would, if Madam CAO can speak on furthering that process to cover our liability there.
Certainly, I can let you know, because as we were going through this review, this is one of the questions that Louis and I looked further into, and we did contact the township's insurer, and they indicated that the additional coverage for this type of coverage, what we're speaking to, depending on the number of volunteers that we were looking at covering, range from 1 to 500 and go from a scale of $150 to $1,000 on the township's premium.
Okay.
And
All I have, thank you.
actually, could I just ask a further question? When it comes to the liability insurance, is that for people volunteering for the township in general, or is it fire specific?
It's not fire specific.
So in my opinion, that's really good coverage for anything that the township employs volunteers for.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Rowe, or Palmer, sorry.
I'm fine, thank you.
Councilor Bennett?
Thank you, Chief Gomes. I know you just touched on it briefly, but I just wanted to ask you the risk levels, I think, if I'm correct, have been established from the fire master plan. Is that correct?
Yes, so I had to do some investigating to find out exactly why they were categorized the way they were, and that it does derive from our community risk assessment that was done in our master fire plan.
Okay.
So for instance, a low risk would be something like a mobile home, whereas I mentioned a high risk would be an institution like Morrison Park Nursing Home.
And is there any, I guess, sort of challenges or difficulties in establishing what that risk level would be?
There was a guideline that they used to determine the criteria or to assess these risk levels. and it was pretty thorough in their research when they did that at that time. I don't think our building stock and our occupancies right now have changed much since the master fire plan.
Yeah, okay. And just looking at the response time that we are striving towards, I think it makes sense to adopt that into this bylaw because, as you mentioned, it wasn't specifically stated in there before. But I know that 14 minutes can be a challenge in the township, and I'm just wondering, in your opinion, what are some of the obstacles or challenges, the biggest ones, to sort of meet that time frame? And I'm just wondering, I know that in here it talks about hiring from residents of Puss Lynch and also the south end of Guelph, and is that a strategy that you're using to help reduce that time? And are there any others you can suggest? Sorry, that was a lot of questions.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Our biggest obstacle is just geography when it comes to the township of Puss Lynch and where our fire station is located. It's centrally located, which is great for a lot of the services that we provide. However, the west end and the east end definitely add to our response time just due to the nature of the distance from our fire hall. So there are opportunities to try and meet the 14 response time criteria that's listed in NFPA, because when the master fire plan was actually published, we were sitting at around 17 to 19 minutes response time for our calls on average, which is quite a bit higher than the 14 minutes that we strive for. One of the strategies, which has already been implemented, is our fire protection agreement contract that we have with Cambridge in our southwest end. That's assisting with response time to those residents, which is good for sure. We can look at other strategies as, a satellite station has been brought up to assist. There was a consultant that did the master fire plan that suggested a location, but that location was based on retaining this location of this central station. And as your worship previously mentioned, maybe there's an opportunity to have two fire stations at two other locations other than the central location to help meet those response times. I'm not sure, but that's something we could definitely look into. There's also other opportunities maybe for other fire protection agreements with neighboring municipalities. We have tried that in the past. They were not in favor of that, but definitely it's something we could, approach again if we're directed by council to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Lewis?
Yes, my questions relate to the depth of response for the various types of buildings. Is there a document anywhere that you use to, if somebody says there's a fire at such and such address, then is there a document you refer to say, yeah, our depth of response should be this, or this?
No, presently there isn't. What we do to help with the depth of the response is we have running procedures. So a running procedures is the apparatus that will respond to a certain type of emergency. And also, to further that, what aid we request. So for instance, a structure fire, we're sending a pumper, a tanker, then a rescue in that order, then another tanker, then another pumper, then our aerial, and also Guelph Hermosa is dispatched at the same time for a structure fire. So that assists with our depth of response, and that's the strategy that we use. So we don't have a specific location that would pop up and say this is what you need. It's based on the nature of the emergency.
All I have, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chief Gomes. If we don't meet these performance objectives, do we just keep lowering them down until we become compliant, or is that where we look into the satellite stations? And I see, a 14-minute response time with turnout and travel as being, it's not a lot for this municipality, especially with the congestion. So I'm just concerned if there's any consequences to not making it, and if we can achieve it, what's the next step? Is it?
I don't know if there's consequences. I think it's a good recommendation to meet international standards and recommendations from organizations that do the research. When I looked through the master fire plan a little bit more thoroughly, they compared us to other like municipalities, and our times were considerably higher for responses. For fire calls, we were 6 minutes more. For medical calls, 7 minutes more. Other calls, we were about 6 minutes more again, and I'm looking at this data right now. It's on page 98. Whether or not, I don't want to say too much, but whether or not somebody can use that against the township, I doubt it, because council sets our level of service based on the resources available. So we all know that council's going to do the best that they can to provide the best service to our citizens, and as long as our organization is meeting the service levels recommended by council, I think we're doing our due diligence.
My other question for you is this insurance to cover the volunteers. Is the idea to, if we have another fire in Mini Lakes, and that's not going to happen, that you recruit, not exactly. You're going to recruit the neighbors that are able and to fight the fire, or is this the purpose of this for the auxiliaries that you have that aren't technically firefighters? If you put them to use because they've received some training, that you could maybe designate them some tasks within their scopes of training already. Because my concern is we start getting, just laymen off the street to take a hose, as Councillor Spoulis or somebody, or Councillor Roth mentioned.
Yep.
They haven't been trained, and then that opens up a pretty big can of worms. So I'm not just sure where
Okay.
the idea is with it.
The intent is never to use a civilian for fire suppression services, that's for sure. The intent for this is that if we're on a large fire scene and all of a sudden I have a lot of, let's say, spectators watching, and I want people out of the way, I could designate, let's say yourself, to get rid of all the neighbors and push them behind a certain boundary line that I might suggest, or on the other side of a roadway. So until we have enough resources on site to do so, I would employ you to assist in that manner. So nothing that would ever involve a person's safety, that's for sure. The other aspect is, if we usually would rely on the insurance company to provide contracting services that may be required, but let's say we have a very large structure and there's farm equipment nearby and we need to cut a trench through the middle of a building right away to stop fire spread from going to the other side of the building, then we can employ this contractor to do so. Or let's say it's a farmer that has that piece of equipment and now they've got this coverage that we have just in case something might happen to them. So that's what we're looking at, but they would never ever provide fire-related emergency services for us. That's not the intent of this.
Okay, thank you, Chief Gomes. Are there any other questions or comments for the chief? All right, so I've already read this, have I not? All in favor of accepting the report? Carried. Thank you. Okay, next one. Moved by Councillor Goyda, seconded by Councillor Spoulis, that report financial 2019-008 regarding the 2018 completed capital projects be received. Any questions or comments before we receive it? All in favor? Carried. All right. It's a little longer. All right. Moved by Councillor Spoulis, seconded by Councillor Goyda, that report FIN 2019-009 regarding the balances in discretionary and restricted reserves be received, and that the capital carry forward balance of $52,669 related to the 2014 information technology software upgrade projects be transferred to the corporate information technology software discretionary reserve to be utilized in future budget years as required, and that the capital carry forward balance of $7,500 related to the logo and branding project be transferred to the operating carry forward discretionary reserve to fund any future community improvement plan grant applications, and that the surplus allocations to discretionary reserves in accordance with the policy adopted by council through council resolution number 2013-284 be reviewed and updated based on the recommendations in the asset management plan, and that the budget allocations to discretionary reserves for the specific budget year and forecast period be reviewed and updated based on the recommendations in the asset management program. All in favor? Carried.
Questions?
Any questions on it?
Yeah, I have a question. There's a line item for asset management plan, and there's various pockets of money, discretionary reserves. I would assume that we're going to be hopping one way or the other way. I was wondering, when is that decisions be likely to be made, and when would we expect to see a asset management plan report?
Director of Finance?
So for your first question about the asset management discretionary reserve, Councillor Supoulis?
Yes.
Sorry. And so some of the recommendations in the report include looking at those surplus allocations and the allocations to the various reserves as part of the budget process. And your question is, when will that be looked at? So as part of the 2020 budget process, the goal would be to align all of these items, so the asset management program with the capital budget and forecast, and based on that, determine what amounts need to be allocated to the reserves and how the surplus should be allocated to those various reserves. You'll remember that one of the recommendations in the asset management program was to have one asset replacement discretionary reserve. And so some of the work around that, after the asset management program is adopted by council, is to look at all of the various reserves that we currently have, which ones relate to asset replacement, and consolidate it based on some of the recommendations in the asset management program.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
All right. So we already voted on that one.
We did, yes.
What are we up to now?
9C, so this is the budget, so.
Okay, so the next item up for review is the budget, but I'd like to ask council if maybe we could discuss the motion that I was going to place, because if it passes, it'll affect the budget. So maybe we could hand over the gavel to Councillor Goyda. And I think Councillor Balmer seconded my motion, so maybe Madame CAO could read the motion for, or she can read it as well?
Yes, Councillor Gordon.
Okay.
Okay, so the motion moved by Mayor Sealy and seconded by Councillor Balmer, whereas it is desirable for the operating budget to include an amount for the commencement of a tree cutting program. Therefore, be it resolved that $20,000 as a separate cost center be added to the 2019 operating budget for the commencement of the cutting down of trees in an area to be identified by staff, and that staff report back on a tree cutting program. And I think perhaps maybe it makes most sense, Mayor Sealy, if you'd like to speak on that before.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I understand this is a bit of an abstract way, just through discussions with the Director of Public Works. This is a recommendation from himself, and something that I support. And we're in a situation where we have a very favorable budget position where we can implement this program. It can get crews cutting trees, get them down to a manageable level, and have a minimal budget impact. And this is all, of course, my opinion. That's why I want to support the director's recommendation. We also received the beneficial news that the OMPF funding has been set at 2018 level, which means that this will have less of an impact on our overall budget. And I generally, being out talking to constituents, the trees along the roads are a concern, and I believe we need to get on it as soon as possible. And this is a great recommendation from the director. So again, I'd like for some support for this, so we can get some crews out cutting trees.
Okay, Councillor Roth, do you have any comment?
Yeah, I have a bit of difficulty with this. I would like to see this deferred to the 2020 budget so that staff could prepare a report as to what the extent of tree cutting would be for this amount of money. I'm not saying this is something that we don't need, but we just had a public meeting and presented our budget. Now, 2 weeks later, we're adding to the budget. It's a little unorthodox. This is my 9th budget that I've gone through, and never has tree cutting been a priority. And the only way I could support this is if something else comes off the operating budget for this department, and we move it to this line item. I'm not saying it isn't a priority, but if it is, then what isn't as big a priority, and how can we find that $20,000? Because it wasn't asked for in our budget deliberations for a base budget increase, and now all of a sudden we're being asked for it. So I think it would be very wise to defer this to the 2020 budget, and in the meantime, we could get a report to tell us exactly what it'll do for the township as far as risk management and everything else, and how long this would have to go. Is it going to be 20,000 a year for 20 years? Is it going to be 20,000 a year for 2 years? But I think right now we don't know enough to okay this, so I couldn't support it.
Okay, Councillor Balmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I share Councillor Ross' concerns about process. The process is always important to me, but at the same time, I think we did have a discussion about tree cutting at one of our budget meetings, and we did have a brief discussion about this. I too was surprised it didn't come through as a base budget increase, but sometimes those forms don't get it in time. I guess I look at this from a public safety perspective, and I think we are in a good position. We've got a little extra coming in from the OMPF funding. My concern is if we don't start getting on top of this, we're just going to get further behind on it. I can recall, I think it was last year, maybe it was the season before, when we had a tree come down on Leslie Road. It was a big hollow tree. We were fortunate enough that there was a resident in the area that cleaned it up to keep the road open. But this isn't a significant request, and to me, it's this. I'm not sure if they're going to roll it out at our previous meeting. They talked about doing a quarter at a time, a quarter of the township, or across the township. But I'll leave that to staff's decision on how to roll out a program like this. To me, this is about public safety, and so although I'm a little uncomfortable about the process and how it came to us, I think we need to get started on it. So I could support moving ahead on this. I do share Councillor Ross' suggestion. I would like to see something else that isn't as urgent a need to come out to address it, but I'd also support it, even just adding it in, because I believe so strongly in that it's a public safety issue. We all drive, regardless of the type of road we live on, we travel on roads that have trees that have been going without attention. The only request I would make of the mayor who put this forward is I might suggest a friendly amendment to the wording. It's currently labeled as a tree cutting program. I would think of this more as a tree maintenance program. I know maintenance involves cutting, but in doing so, I want to make sure people understand this isn't about going and cutting down all trees on the roadside. This is about removing overhanging limbs that pose a hazard, probably taking out the most dangerous of the trees, having someone assess it, making a determination between, well, that's dead and not dangerous, and dead and dangerous. And if we can get at least on top of the dead and dangerous ones, I think it's money well invested, so I could support it.
I support your modification to the motion, Councillor Bowman.
Councillor Sapoulas.
Yes, question for our Director of Public Works. The 20,000, what would that be used for?
20,000, we would look at whatever company or tree service that we could arrange to come into. We would use that money, first off, to get a qualified arborist to patrol whatever part of the township we decide where we're going to start in, identify the most urgent trees in that area, and then just start bringing those trees down in that area.
Okay, you haven't thought about using the money to hire somebody else so you have the right number of people to take the trees down, or is that a non-starter? Because you used to take trees down yourselves at one time.
Yes, this department has, over the years, with the development in the township, which includes housing and new utilities now, and the size of the trees they're getting to. It's just, we don't have qualified staff and equipment to do this type of work anymore.
Okay. I'm going to support the motion. I'm a little bit concerned on the process. It's sort of after the fact, but certainly I understand what Councilor Blum is saying. It's a public safety thing. I did have comments from residents that there's trees that are about to fall down. Some of them are on private property and some of them are within the road allowance, so I will support it. The only suggestion I would have is that this be included in the base budget, because it's an ongoing program as opposed to a one-shot deal. If it's a one-shot deal, then all we're doing is just paying it out of reserves for once, and then we got to continually argue putting it in. So I guess the question I have for our finance people, adding this in, what would be the change in the tax rate, assuming that Wellington County rate is whatever they propose it is?
I'm just trying to open up my Excel spreadsheet. It's,
Can I just make a quick comment?
Sure. Mayor Sealy.
So Councillor Rowe, there was a discussion while you were away on vacation. The Director of Public Works mentioned that this 20,000, also inclusive of an arborist mapping the trees, would be, can I ask the Director, was 10 days of tree maintenance, or approximately, or the hope to have 10 days of cutting? This wasn't just, a consultant fee to just map. There's going to be guys doing work on this area that you hopefully.
Yeah, that would be correct. I mean, and that's just based on what, we are paying now on an on-call basis to bring in a tree service. If we have a program that we want to put in place, then obviously we would put it out to some of the different firms we work with and see what the best deal we could get, hopefully, because we want to use some of the funding to do identification in the area. Obviously, that's going to take some of it. So, our hope would be to get, 10 to 12 days. And then in doing that, we'll allow them to come in and bring it down to a certain point where it's safe for us to come in later and finish it up, type of deal. So we want to be able to keep the contractor moving and take care of as many trees as we can with this funding.
Thank you. I just wanted.
Okay. I do have a question, and I think this would be directed at the Director of Public Works. Earlier today, there was a meeting, the Friends of Mill Creek, and in that meeting, they talked briefly about the trail, specifically behind the Puslinch Community Center, and how it is a wood chip trail. And I know that we're also talking about the Fox Run Park, making that a wood chip trail. Actually, I take that back. That's a gravel trail. So we're talking about the wood chip trail at the community center. Is there any opportunity with cutting if we go ahead with this and we cut down a bunch of trees and branches, is there any opportunity to be chipping up that wood and using it as part of a trail somewhere to get some added value out of it?
For sure. I mean, to stockpile the chips, we obviously have room that we can do that, to stockpile chips that we get on the roadside. As far as the trail, at the Wayne Stokely Trail, that is a different type of wood chip that we've used in there. It's more of a wood mill byproduct, that we get a longer life out of those wood chips for that. But we use a lot of wood chips in around now our parklands that we're using as well. So
we could maybe use it for something
most
to get some
definitely,
value out of it.
yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm not sure. Did you? Oh, you read that.
Yep, I'm opening it. It's open now.
Did you want to perhaps ask your question again?
Yeah, I'm just, with this $20,000 increase, what would be the levy rate? Assuming Wellington County's rate is as they said it would be. I would assume it's more or less the same.
Okay, so with the addition of the 20,000, as you may recall, what was presented to the public was a 2.8% increase on the median typical single-family detached dwelling. With the addition of the 20,000, it's now a 3.32% for the township, but the total is 1.73% compared to the 1.64% that was previously presented. So the total blended impact, right now with the addition of the 20,000 is showing as 1.73%.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? No? Okay. So we'll take a vote. All those in favor? Carried.
Just the specific motion that it be taken, that the budget be increased, as opposed to taking it out of reserves for a one-shot deal. In other words, we put it in our, in our base, so it's a continuously 20,000 available for future years as well.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, so I think we should just perhaps, Councillor Sapoulis just added on to that particular, with the leave of council, of course, added on to that particular motion, because I'm assuming council made that decision based on what Mary indicated would be the tax rate increase.
Okay.
If that's my understanding of just how council voted. So it is a $20,000
Base budget.
increase. So if I may just come over to Councillor Goyda, and I will just make sure that we make that
Okay.
clear, and then we can repeat that back to council just so that they're.
And I don't know if I can speak on it. Can I speak? But that was, I believe, the intent, talking to the Director of Public Works, and as well as when I asked the Deputy Clerk to write this up in the separate line, because it didn't want to get lost into the operating budget. It's specifically a separate line for tree maintenance annually. going forward.
Yeah, it's important to make sure it's clear that it's not a coming out of reserve, it's not a one-shot deal, it affects the overall tax rate.
It's a critical service.
Right. And I hear the concern with the manner in which it was brought forward, and we had that one discussion during the budget meeting, and I thought it just happened quickly, and I felt it important.
3.32%. Tax impact for the typical residents of township.
Tax impact.
One blended tax impact.
Okay.
Okay.
So you're just.
Okay. Just read this whole paragraph again?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to clarify the wording of the motion to be, therefore be it resolved that $20,000 as a separate cost center be added to the 2019 operating budget as a base budget increase, which if the budget is approved will result in a 3.32% township tax impact and a 1.73% blended tax impact for the commencement of the cutting down of trees in an area to be identified by staff, and that staff report back on a tree maintenance program. Mayor Seeley?
I just thought that Councillor Ballmer's recommendation, and I accepted it, was to remove the wording of cutting down of trees. Just
Yeah, to change it to, the
tree maintenance.
We did at the bottom of that motion change the word from
Tree
cutting
cutting.
to maintenance.
So in the body, it says for the commencement of the cutting down of trees, and then in the end, it says, and that staff report back on a tree maintenance program.
sufficient, Councillor Ballmer?
I would have liked it all to be, because I consider both to be a tree maintenance program. I understand it's the same, it suggests we're
change?
just going to go out and start
Want me
cutting
to
down
change it?
trees, and we may just be delimbing a few, that's all,
Okay, so we'll change it to say for the commencement of the tree
maintenance program.
maintenance in an area to be identified by staff.
Perfect, thank you. I do have a question, though.
Go ahead, Councillor Ballmer.
We're talking about now, we went, before the blended rate the impact was 2.8. And so this goes to
3.2.
3.32 for the typical average home.
For the township tax impact.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, do you want me to revote? Shall
Yeah,
I revote?
You may just, with leave of council, that was my understanding of what you actually voted on when Councillor Goyda did take the vote. So as long as everyone concurs with that, then the voting's been completed.
Okay, carried.
All right, we go back to the budget. Thank you. All right, moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Ballmer, that report financial 2019-10 regarding the 2019 budget final be received and the excess funds of $550,627 related to the owner's omission period be relocated from the legal contingency discretionary reserve to the asset management discretionary reserve in order to address the recommendations from the asset management plan, and that council enact a bylaw to adopt the budget for the Corporation Township of Puslinch for the year 2019 as amended. Any questions or comments? I have a quick question on this one. Was the omission period funds, was it not going to be divided up into different discretionary reserves? And did we change our mind on that, or it's all going to the asset management plan?
That's what my original recommendation was as part of that, as part of the report that I prepared.
Okay. I just thought, for some reason, I believe that some of it was going to roads, but it's all going to the asset management plan.
Yes, and as part of our update, after the asset management plan is complete, we are going to be looking at all of the reserves and how they should be divvied up in the future, with the hope of having one asset replacement reserve for the corporation as a whole, just based on the asset program recommendations.
Excellent. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, all in favor? Carried. All right, that's the budget done. Moved by Councillor Ballmer, seconded by Councillor Rowe, that report ADM 2019-006 regarding request by Lena Gorgis, traffic safety concerns, Old Ruby Lane be received, and the staff requests the OPP to deploy the speed spy for a period of time on Victoria Road and Old Ruby Lane and report back on the results. Questions or comments on that one? Councillor Ballmer?
Yeah, I recall when this came to council, and I must admit, I don't recall why we asked to see a copy of the covenants, but my goodness, talk about regulation and red tape. What's interesting here, when I was campaigning in there were some of the residents who were speaking to the covenants temporarily, because they're really none of our business, I guess. Maybe I won't speak to them then, because they really they're all things to do with them and nothing to do with us. Well, I guess the only question, I probably made the same comment when this came to us before. Again, we have the TAC recommending a speed limit lower than the posted limit. And I do have concerns with that. If when we run these things and it comes back, I know this is, I'm the old record on this one, stuck in a groove, but it just, I can't get it out of my head that when we run the TAC and it comes to a lower speed limit than what's posted, we don't change it. I guess the question I would have for Public Works folks, without going into the details of their covenants, because I found it was somewhat confusing, their requirements or their minimum requirements for trees. I think the resident would be open to having trees along the side. If I could ask the Director of Public Works, was that something we'd ever entertain, is putting trees on our side of the property line instead of having the owner put it on their side to provide screening?
I'm not aware of that being done previously, but obviously, there's no reason that it could not, as long as the funding was in place to do so.
Okay, because I know the county does roadside tree plantings in certain places, and I know for this family, it's a safety issue. I stopped and talked to them during the campaign. They're concerned that a car could come off Victoria Road and either into their front yard or backyard. So I understand, but if they were to go and get trees from the Green Legacy and put them in this year, their children would be through university before they'd stop a car from coming through the backyard, so I thought perhaps, an alternate approach might be for us to put something on our side of the fence, but maybe that's something I'll look into with the county to see what their program, how it works, before I bring it back here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I think when I read through this and the restrictive covenants that deal with fencing, I guess my interpretation of the reason why there is a restrictive covenant there of no fencing is for the aesthetic purposes, so that it's not a subdivision filled with all kinds of various heights and styles of fences. But I guess in this particular instance, and this particular property, and I guess the one immediately across the road, which also runs parallel to Victoria Road, it's more of a safety concern due to the fact that there's no barrier, and when you look at the map or the satellite version, the backyard sort of lot line is fairly close to the road, and if there's cars speeding through there and lose control, I mean, it does present a bit of a safety concern. I know those restrictive covenants aren't something that we have any sort of authority to change, but I'm wondering if council would support that we perhaps write a letter, or even just a phone call, I guess, to Mrs. Gorges to encourage her and perhaps the neighbor across the street to make a special request to, I think it's Audrey Meadows Corporation, or to the developer, to perhaps ask for special relief from that restrictive covenant only along that one, the sort of the side and back fence line of only those two properties. And I know that perhaps sets a precedent that anyone and everyone might ask for a fence, but I think that based on the fact that this is a safety issue, that would be the reason why, or their approach, I guess, in asking for a relief from that covenant. And I know that there's no obligation for Audrey Meadows to do that, but at least it's suggesting something that may be of assistance to them.
Yes, I would support your suggestion, Councilor Goyd. I think perhaps this person is not aware that there's a covenant, and for us to just park a call with her and say, look, you should pursue the organization responsible for issuing the covenant. We as council and township can't do anything about it. The other question I have is the speed spy. What's the anticipated outcome? Sorry, not the outcome. We're going to get a result, and what are we going to do with that result? That's a question of Don Creed.
The information will be passed back to council.
Similar to Curry Drive, I would assume.
Correct. The information you're going to gain out of the speed spy is relatively no different than the same data you get out of a traffic count. You're going to get the amount of vehicles, and you're going to get the speed those vehicles are doing.
Is it something that's useful?
I mean, traffic counts are always useful for one thing or another. Whether it relates to this, I'm not sure. I mean, it was, when TAC was brought in, it was council's tool to use to have an answer to individuals requesting lower speed limits and be consistent with that approach. I know there's been requests in the past, before this one, that also the TAC came in at 70 kilometers an hour. At that time, it was council's decision that if the TAC request does not bring it out at 60 kilometers an hour, then council would not move forward on it.
Okay, I guess I got two points I want to cover off. First of all, I'd like the CEO to ask our insurer if TAC does say it's 70K and an accident does occur, does that have an effect on our insurance? In other words, the risk to us? The second of all is, as you mentioned, Mr. Creed, that we have numerous requests, and to do one-offs type of thing, I don't think is appropriate. It would be makes more sense to do it as a program type of thing, if that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to suggest that for the next budget cycle, staff address the ramifications of and the program of putting in lesser speeds based on TAC. Excuse me.
Do we need a motion for that support, or?
It would be helpful if we had a motion, just if that's what you would like us to report back on. So if you're moving that and if you had a seconder, then certainly we can report back on it, just for tracking.
Do you
Maybe we
want
can wait
to?
till Councillor Rose returns to.
I know.
Well, I'll make some well, I'd like him to be here for these other comments, but in regards to the, in regards to the fence and the speed limit, I don't believe any pine pressure-treated wood fence is going to provide a barrier for a car coming off the road. So my question maybe would be to the director again, of Public Works. Do you have an estimate of the cost of a guardrail? So if we want to keep the cars on Victoria Road, I think the appropriate measure is a guardrail there. So do you have an estimate of per linear meter as to how much guardrail installation would be?
No, that would be something I'd have to come back to council with.
In my opinion, I think if we're going to address the safety concern,
Address the safety concern.
address the safety concern, not the aesthetic concern. And, well, we can address that when it comes back. So I'll ask Councillor Sepoulis if you want to say your motion again.
Yes, look, we will be getting, during this term of council, various requests to change the speed limit based on various individuals who perceive that the road speeds are excessive, and we will get another TAC report. So my motion is that staff discuss with the insurance company what the risk is to the township if TAC recommends a lower speed limit than what is posted. And the second recommendation is that staff consider as part of the 2020 budget a program to review and change speed limits based on TAC results. In other words, you're going to have to go out and do a TAC for every road, so that's going to cost money. And at least we'll have that available, and we can make a decision if we want to proceed with that basis or we want to do it piecemeal. React or plan. I'm more for planning.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, Councillor Goyda, second. Okay, questions, comments? Councillor Roth.
I have no questions.
Councillor Bulmer.
I agree with the objective, but I think as we move into asset management planning, if we look at some of the details of the asset management plan, it included traffic studies, it included traffic counts. I think the best way to deal with this is to roll it out. That's what we already have a plan coming to do that. I don't think we need to double up again on as we do our traffic counts and traffic and through the asset management plan. I think we can. I'd like to work it in there as we assess the roads going forward. I'd like to achieve this, but I'd like to achieve it in a manner that we're taking advantage of the plans we already have in place to study the traffics on the roads.
And I would assume staff would come back and say, this is how we should approach it. The asset management plan is this, and bang, bang, bang.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm not asking for separate dollars. I'm just asking staff to consider this as part of the budget, and the most expedient and cost-effective way, leave it up to them.
Or as the most cost-effective way for the township to achieve this end. And they may come back and say through asset management, they may come back and say through a separate study.
Exactly, leave it up to staff to
Okay,
come
no,
up with
that's
the-
fine. If we're just asking staff to
Yeah,
come up with a recommendation on how best to achieve this,
Yes.
I'm fine with that. I just don't want to start hiring more
no,
consultants.
I don't want to start hiring either. I want staff to think this through and say,
Okay.
this is the best way of doing it, and that's fine.
I got it then.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor, go ahead, any?
I was going to suggest sort of almost exactly the same thing as Councillor Balmer, is that I recalled in the asset management that part of that was completing traffic counts and traffic studies, and it seemed like a bit of a duplication, but in terms of having staff report on how to best handle it, I'm fine with that. So.
I agree. Okay, so all in favor of that motion? Sure. Carried. That's not this one.
No,
Okay.
Good.
That one. And
it's an
now,
amendment.
and so this is, we started talking about the report from Lena Gorges, so I'll reread it and we can have a vote, I believe. The report ADM 20,019-006 regarding request by Lena Gorges traffic safety concerns, Old Ruby Lane be received, and that staff requests the OPP to deploy the speed spy for a period of time on Victoria Road and Old Ruby Lane and report back on the results. All in favor of that? Carried. Okay. What are we up to now? Amendment to the growth plan. Moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Balmer, that the Wellington County Report Amendment 1 to the Growth Plan 2017 be received for information. And council supports the changes outlined in the report, and I'll ask that Sarah Wellheim, I'll hand over the microphone to yourself so you can, to council.
I don't have to do anything, do I? Okay, good. Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. The report before you deals with the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. I think you've probably all heard about it by now, but it's a provincial policy document to manage growth. A 2017 update brought in some changes that were somewhat controversial, primarily raising density targets and introducing two mapping systems that to the agricultural and natural heritage systems that weren't in line or maybe as accurate as we would have liked to see. So this report went to Planning Committee on last Thursday, and on the same day I attended the provincial roundtable where they were asking for feedback from certain individuals in our area. And I'll make some comments throughout around with respect to the roundtables, but I think what we'll be seeing is that the province is going to be moving quickly with changes, and this is a draft amendment, and the tone of the discussion at the roundtables seems to indicate that there might be further changes to the document. The province wants action-oriented, solution-based comments rather than questions. It's okay to ask clarification, but they're also looking for suggestions for how to resolve issues with the document. So I'll go through in a concise way and leave lots of time for you to have questions. So just honing in on the report, starting with the background. The main takeaway there is that the province is issuing that pause, and that allows for more consultation and just more time for us to get things right. So the amendment is now under consideration, and the comment period closes next Thursday. The changes to the growth plan are divided into broad categories that Mr. Pickard has outlined in the report, the county report, and I'll keep true to that. And that's essentially how the roundtables were structured as well. They were divided into the same main topics, and then there were subtopics as well. The natural heritage and agricultural system mapping, it was issued a year ago. and took effect immediately. There were no transition provisions, and that was unusual for the province to make that kind of a change. Unfortunately, what we found is that the mapping was flawed in many ways, and it impacted Puslinch by expanding prime agricultural land and also significantly increasing the natural heritage system beyond what the current designations in the official plan reflect. And that directly has an impact on severances. I think that's probably where Puslinch would feel it the most. Now, what they're allowing to do through this amendment is that the two new systems would not apply until it has been implemented into the county official plan, which is also the official plan for Puslinch. So that means we can go back to the official plan mapping that we have. Gives us more time to correct and refine the mapping before it actually applies. And it would allow for new severance applications to be considered under those current land use designations. Also, the language refers to refinements to the mapping. So these refinements can be completed before the municipal comprehensive review, which we're required to complete by 2022. Or it can be completed as part of the municipal comprehensive review. In both cases, though, they're subject to provincial approval, so the province will have the final say. The amendment doesn't get into detail about what refine means. It's not defined. And the province is also clear that the changes that can be made are to the mapping, but not to the policies. So generally, we see this as a very good change. And from the roundtables, we heard that was, I think, the thing that they heard the most about at AMO from other municipalities as well. The intensification and greenfield density targets, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Basically, what it does is it allows us to keep the density and intensification targets where they are now. Whereas we would have been looking at potential increases of fair significance. Settlement area boundary expansions. This was said 3 times quite forcefully at the roundtable. The Greenbelt plan is not being amended. And so none of the changes in Amendment 1 apply to the Greenbelt. So there are two areas I wanted to highlight. One, they're allowing 2 things. One is an adjustment to settlement area boundaries, and that's an equal swap of land. They compared it to squeezing a balloon, if that helps. But basically, if you're taking land from one area, it has to go somewhere else. Because I just wanted to highlight Morriston being a town/village in the Greenbelt plan and being on private services, it wouldn't qualify for any adjustments based on the way that the amendment is proposed right now. And then expansions, again, Morriston wouldn't qualify for the same reason. So the expansions that they're allowing for would be no more than 40 hectares outside of the municipal comprehensive review. So we still have the municipal comprehensive review ahead of us. I think what they were really trying to do was to allow for, things that might have already been in progress by municipalities to continue, and in some cases, municipalities have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on studies for some of these things, and they wanted to allow them to complete them. Small rural settlements, that's a new, they've defined a new term called rural settlements. And Arkell is the only designated hamlet in Puslinch, so that would be the only area that based on the way it's currently written, that would qualify under that. So the reason for that change is because in municipalities like Centre Wellington, for example, they have density targets that they have to meet in their serviced urban areas, and hamlets would basically penalize them or make them have to make up even more density in their urban areas, because if their hamlets are on individual services, they have no hope of being able to make the 16 units per hectare minimum. So that's really what that flexibility is meant to provide. I'm not sure that it really has a lot of influence in Puslinch. Employment planning, however, I think will be more of interest here. We have a new term, again, provincially significant employment zones. And these are areas that must be protected and cannot be converted to non-employment uses outside of a municipal comprehensive review. When we reviewed this in the Wellington context, none of these zones are identified within Wellington. There are 29 proposed throughout the growth plan area based on draft criteria that they've made available. So the purpose is really to protect significant zones which the province feels would be vulnerable to something like residential conversion or encroachment. At this point, it doesn't capture areas of rural employment that are on private services. There are no policies associated with those zones, so we really don't know what it would mean, even if we were able to be successful in comments asking for example, some areas in Puslinch to be recognized. We don't know what that might mean for the future and whether it would be a good or a bad thing. So the way that this was described at the roundtable was, it was meant to unlock land for residential. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead. Just to finish off, the employment zone, we'll be continuing to review that. I know we only have a short amount of time left before the comment period is over, but we'll be looking at it and how we might be able to make comments for the Puslinch context and the county context as well. There's also a policy that allows for a one-time window to convert employment lands ahead of that municipal comprehensive review, and that's where it's meant to unlock land for residential development that, again, other municipalities might have spent a lot of time and resources to study and were perhaps already underway. So that's what that's really meant to do. So I think that concludes that part. Moving on to major transit station areas. I think a good example of that would be a subway station. And so major transit station areas are already reflected in policies within the growth plan. They're within settlement areas, and they're meant to ensure that within a certain radius, there would be a much higher density of development, so that it would be able to provide the jobs and the homes nearby, so that people can benefit from that high density transit. The proposed policies are meant to allow municipalities to identify major transit stations ahead of the municipal comprehensive review. So if they already have them identified in their official plans, for example. Currently, the policies aren't applicable to Wellington, as there are no major transit station areas identified within Wellington County. Okay, that wraps up the main areas that we covered off in the report. There are also some regulation changes that I probably don't need to get into here unless you have questions. I guess the bottom line is that we're continuing to review the implications, and we will be providing comments on behalf of the county through the environmental registry posting. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. I'll open up to questions from council. Councillor Roth.
Yes, thank you. This, to me, seems like a good news report.
We don't get those very often.
No. Am I understanding this correctly, that this should help us out with our natural heritage mapping errors and our prime agricultural mapping, that we can get more severances?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think the point that it turns on is what refine means to the province. I think what it means is we can't redo and do a whole new analysis. But I think, you know, through our comments, sitting at the roundtable sessions, there are other municipalities that want refine to be defined, whereas I'm kind of feeling like maybe it would be nice for us to have the flexibility to decide what that means. So that might be an area where we might have some comments. I don't know that it's going to, it's not necessarily going to take it all the way back to what we have now. But I feel better about it. It gives us a fair chance to look at it and to use the former analysis that we did, even though it was a number of years ago. I think that it's a more detailed approach than the province used in the current mapping. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Bulmer?
Thank you. Good evening.
Hello.
Welcome back. Yeah, I think there's a lot of very interesting stuff here. Much of it, I think, allows municipalities to respond appropriately, and I think most municipalities are fairly responsible. I like the idea of being able to refine the mapping for the agricultural lands and the natural heritage lands. You know, we have areas in my neighborhood up in the headwaters of Mill Creek where there's fields that have standing water in July that they've mapped as prime agriculture. Well, there's nobody that's going to farm anything where we've got standing water in July. We've also got some places that are mapped by the GRCA as being provincially significant wetlands, but the province has mapped them as prime agriculture. So there's a lot of work to do, and I hope refining does mean pushing these boundaries back to where we're protecting the right things for the right reasons. I'm all for protecting agricultural land, and I'm all for protecting the natural environment lands. But if we don't protect them for the right reasons, we're all going to look silly, and nobody's going to see any value in what we're trying to achieve. My question is, on the mapping piece, and I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure I get it on the record. This pause in the mapping application hasn't happened yet. Is that correct? It has to wait for this amendment to pass. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so between now and whenever this is passed, the existing mapping is still in place?
The existing
Provincial mapping.
provincial mapping is currently in effect.
And that when this is passed, then it'll return to our official plan mapping
The way that it's written today, yes.
until we refine it. And then we can change the provincial mapping to match our official plan mapping.
But no, I think ultimately the approval rests with the province, and I'm not sure that that's where it'll land at the end of the day. But we'll do refinements, and we'll try to pursue the best possible scenario.
Okay, so this is interesting. So what you're suggesting is it may not be able to resolve all of the concerns that we have with the inaccurate mapping then?
Well, I think what we'll have to do is we'll have to do a review of that, and we'll have to work with the province to find out, you know, what the general terms are, and we'll be able to show them where the errors are.
Okay.
I just don't want to make any
Understood.
promises here because they might amend this amendment before it.
Understood.
Right.
And so I'm aware that we have qualified press in the room, and I want to make sure that the story that's written accurately reflects the position we're in. That's what I'm,
Yes.
and that I understand it too, in case
Sure.
I get questions.
Sure.
So how do you envision that process? Would there be a public part of that process in refining the mapping, do you think?
I don't know. It is not clarified in the current amendment, and that is something that was discussed at the roundtables. Some people might like that, or some municipalities might like that, some may not. There were representatives of the development industry, municipalities, the Federation of Agriculture, so they had a pretty good mix of people at the meeting. And they're holding multiple meetings throughout the province, so we'll have to see where that ends up.
But as a municipality, we'd be open to hearing from residents, landowners, when they believe there's an error on their property, though. We wouldn't close our ears to that, I take it.
All I'm responding to is the fact that it isn't right the way that it's reflected now. It's not a requirement to involve the public from the province, and that ultimately they would have the approval on it. Yeah.
I understand you're in a tough spot. It's not clear. I'm trying to see where we're going too, so.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I disagree about having a public process. I think that's something that that lays further down the road for all of us.
Okay.
Yeah,
The pause is the important part for now.
that's right. Yeah.
Let's see. You mentioned, you talked about why we couldn't do anything with Morriston, primarily because in the Greenbelt. But it made me think of, we have in our soon-to-be adopted, hopefully, new zoning bylaw, identified some lands in this area as future development. How does this change to the places to grow, perhaps change Aberfoyle's future?
Well, right now, yeah, I'm not sure if I can answer that really well at the moment. You generally, the 40 hectare potential increase is if there's projected demand for that. So it would still need to be rationalized, and I don't think that you have that here. And then if you wanted to look at a refinement to the Aberfoyle boundary, you're back to the squeezing the balloon,
Right.
where you'd have to steal it from somewhere else.
Okay.
And yeah,
That's very helpful. And that demand is driven up. The demand is driven up by someone who wants to build, but by the numbers that were assigned and our ability to meet those targets under current.
and your servicing constraints.
Okay, super. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Goyda?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wilhelm, for being here today. So when I'm reading this proposed amendment to the growth plan, to me, I think that for Puslinch in particular, this is good news. I think specifically as it relates to the provincial mapping and the natural heritage system, which will, I'm hoping, allow the county staff to work with the provincial staff to make the refinements that are required. And I know, although I wasn't on council at the time, I do recall attending council meetings where concerns had been raised about errors in the mapping, as Councillor Balmer has just spoken of, and the impact of those designations specifically as it relates to severances in the township. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that the council even made delegations on that at AMO last summer. So I think this is really encouraging to see that those concerns are being heard and that there are changes being proposed on that front. I'm wondering, and I understand that this amendment hasn't been implemented yet, and there could be further amendments to the amendment. But if this does sort of go through as it is written, would there be, or has there been, I guess, applications for severances that have come through and been denied or not even accepted, I guess, based on the mapping as it stands now, the provincial mapping, that would potentially now be able to qualify for a severance if it's repealed back to what it is in the official plan? And is there any method of those people who have maybe wanted severances that couldn't apply before based on the provincial mapping and may be able to now, would they even know how, like, is there any way of letting those people know?
Well, I'll start with the first part. Yes, there were applications denied. There were applications deferred. There were applications appealed. And probably applications that people chose not to file as well. So we have kind of all of the above. If an application was denied, if the application is completed, someone would have to reapply. And, if there are applications that can come out of deferral, that would have to be reviewed under the policies. In terms of, any obligation to notify people, I think that's a really good question that I don't have an answer for. I think it would be hard to do.
Yeah.
We get a vast number of inquiries. I think people in the surveying and planning, private planning field are probably watching with interest. And that's something we'll have to put our minds to when we see what the actual amendment is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just one other question. As it relates, the comment period closes soon, and I guess I don't really know whether we should be making comment, and if so, what those comments may be. But you're talking about the employment planning and this provincially significant employment zones, and I know that you said that the township of Puslinch, this wouldn't be applicable because there's no municipal services, and I'm wondering if some of the area along the 401 should be something that we should consider including and making comment on as part of these provincially significant employment zones. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
It's certainly something that we've been discussing in the office. We've had a lot of, meetings and discussions, and we're certainly aware of the uniqueness of Puslinch and the transportation corridors that you have. There are some nuances to, you've got the Greenbelt plan that that takes out part of the lower part of Puslinch. So the fact that they haven't addressed rural employment situations doesn't mean that it can't be put forward as a comment. There were other municipalities that made that comment at the round table. Whether or not the province decides to go that route is another question. I'm aware that, and Karen, you might be able to help me out, not to put you on the spot, but I know previously that Puslinch had made some comments, I think, on its own around the 2-kilometer kind of buffer on either side of the 401. So that was beyond what comments the county had made. So I'm not sure if that's something that the township might want to kind of go it on your own to kind of reinforce that interest that you have.
That's correct. There was a motion or a resolution passed by council. I think it was within the last year and a half, if I'm remembering correctly, making that request.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Yes, several questions. You mentioned that the implementations are going to be very fast. Any idea how fast?
They
We're
wouldn't.
looking months or?
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't commit to a specific time frame other than the fact that they plan to move quickly. with it. So it sounds like months to me, but I don't know for sure. Yeah.
The severances, Councilor Goya touched on it. We've had some severances that went all the way to LPAT and got turned down. I think would be unfair for these individuals, given the change, that they have to reapply. Isn't there a mechanism that the county can, excuse me, address this?
Well, it wasn't a situation created by the county. It was created by the provincial mapping.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
It was created by the county, but our residents went to LPAT, and they were obviously turned down, but now we got to change. I would think that there should be some means of communicating with these people who at least went through LPAT.
What I will say is that I don't think there were very many that went to LPAT. I'm thinking like a few. So I don't think it would be difficult for us to be able to look that up. And it's possible that either the putting the pause on the mapping is beneficial to them, or it might not make a difference, you know, and I'd need to know, we'd need to look at that a little bit more. There are obligations on individual land, like I you know, I don't mean to be smart about it. I mean, people also need to keep up with the policies, and we can't notify people of like that pendulum swings, you know, things change, and we'll do our best. And I think we'd have to be careful about how we approach that, because if you notify one, then, you know, how do you do
I would
it?
think, I agree with your
Yeah.
assessment, but certain people that went the LPAT route, I think they did the extra distance, and there should be an obligation on contact.
Okay.
Okay,
yeah.
a couple other questions. I agree with Councilor Goyder with respect to the commercial industrial corridor on either side of the 401. Is it something that you as a county would put forward, or is it something that we should put forward?
Well, I don't know yet what our comments will be, and I think that 2 kilometer buffer on either side, I think that was an independent thing that the township was pursuing.
Yes, and we made deputations to both Roma and AMO on that. So I meant-
Right.
Okay, so my understanding is that you said that we're going to have a submission to the province on the ERO posting 134504. Is it possible that we can get, our mayor and CAO can get a copy of it, and they can review it, and then we as council authorize them to make the necessary comments in support of it, and add anything else that we as council think is appropriate? Or are you going to push it to the wire, it's just on the, do it on the 28th?
There might be some wire pushing happening. Yeah, I think there's a lot, looking across the county, there will be a lot of things that we'll need to be looking at, and I suspect Thursday is county council to boot in the morning, so I'm not sure how that might come together, to be honest. Yeah.
I really would like us to support it from Puslin's point of view, and make any additional comments, such as this commercial industrial corridor on the other side of the 401 as being a potential future employment land. Okay, so when we get through, I'll make the motion that we ask the CAO and the mayor to look at your proposed response, and they have the authority to amend it or support it. The last question I got with respect to Aberfoyle expansion. You mentioned that it's like pushing a balloon, but you look at Aberfoyle, there's a lot of lands there that you can't build on it at all, because they're in the floodplain. So is that a reason that we can use to say we can't expand to Aberfoyle the way it is because of floodplain, and we need to go outside?
I don't have an answer for you just now. I know with a refinement has to be an equal exchange. So that doesn't, I don't think that hits, are you referring to the 40 hectare expansion? The thing.
I'm referring to the lands that are basically sterilized. We can't build on it because they're in the floodplain. I don't know how much there is, but there's significant amount in Aberfoyle, and I'm wondering if they can say, look, we can't build here, we want to expand to allow for this fact that we can't build here.
I think if that might be a comment you might want to make through the township's commenting, but that part of that 40 hectare increase has to be justified in our forecasts. So it has to be something that there's already we've already projected for, and we wouldn't have projected for floodplain development. So, yeah.
I can understand the
Yeah.
predicament you're in. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Wilhelm. It sounds, the more of this discussion we have, it sounds that they've given us this idea, we're going to change the mapping, but there's so many restrictions in place that it's not going to be feasible to us. And I think what Councillor Sapoulis was trying to allude to is remove the floodplain from the boundary and then it add on. And that's what I have a question for is, if all the land is private, so we would essentially expand the settlement boundary, but then reclassify some other private land, and we'd have to, is that how that's going to work because of the balloon effect? It would remove John's property from it and add mine, and would there be public consultation on that? And it sounds like there's a lot of hurdles there to make this balloon stretch and move.
Yes, and I believe, I should say, I'm taking notes down, and I will still look at that as we go through our review process. Well, what I'm trying to remember is whether I think that might be subject to potential appeal. I don't think that's probably not information that you're interested in, so I'll leave it at that. But I'll look at it further. How you would actually technically do it through? I know that there were questions from attendees at the roundtables as to whether they could, this is policy speak. Can you net out the core Greenlands features, and that wasn't made clear in that 40 hectare expansion. So, there's I'm certainly willing to look at it and see if I can figure that out for you.
So another concern I have is that if, we all of a sudden have this ability to have severances, it talked about the services. Are they going to allow private services on these severances, so i.e. septics, or is it still pushing the sewer and water main?
So the way things stand, I think the severances would go back to status quo on individual services unless there was one person, I don't know who it was, that asked the province to ban rural severances. I have an idea where that might have come from, but it's up to the province. So I think what I'm mindful of in the way that we do our comments is I don't necessarily want to just point out things that they've missed. I want to point out things that they've hit. And so to make sure that they know we Puslinch wants to keep that kind of opportunity. So I'm guessing, but I'm assuming that you're perfectly agreeable to the idea of individual services for those kinds of severances, and that has been allowed.
Did they hit that in the current, like not the current one that's in place? Is private systems?
It doesn't take that away.
It does not?
It doesn't.
The amendment or the current one that's still in place until the amendment's approved?
No,
Either?
well,
That's the answer I'm looking for.
it's the mapping that caused problems. It didn't take away the ability to do severances. It did in a different way, but it wasn't because of service.
Didn't ban private services.
That's
It was
right.
the mapping that was the issue.
It was, yep.
You're confident that resources available to you, you're going to be able to adjust. From what I'm hearing from you, we're going to end up probably somewhere between the official plan that it was, what the province did, we're going to try and land in the middle somewhere.
You know what? Well, yeah, I mean, I spoke to my director today about this and just starting to get ideas about what kind of process and what that would look like and whether there's public consultation, whether, yeah, so all of these things are being discussed.
Yeah, and I would promote public consultation. Councillor Bulmer took me for a little drive to show me the different agricultural classifications, and that's wonderful public knowledge, and hopefully we can take advantage of that. The last thing, I just want to give you an example. So I understand that there's settlement boundaries, but we also have existing subdivisions. Will any of this legislation allow for an expansion of the existing subdivision? If, I get there's a long list, but one of them being the rationalization that there's a need for it. But will it, if there was, say, a dead-end road that went to a cornfield, maybe not a cornfield, that's a bad example, like a really hilly area or something that's not prime ag, and would there be a possibility for expansion of these subdivisions if they're outside of the settlement area? They're an existing...
I think that's a pretty clear no, because the province essentially banned a state residential development years ago. We took it out of our plan in the mid-2000s. So that form of development is, we'll see an end to that as anything that still has a designation can be completed, but I think with Phase 2 of Fox Run, that's probably the end of what Puss Lynch has designated for that. Yeah.
That's all I have for you, Ms. Follen. Is there any other additional?
I'd just like to make the motion.
So can I just speak to that real quick? I will receive the agenda relatively soon, and then I can just give you my word that the CAO and I'll make an appointment. Maybe we can have a meeting and review it.
Okay, and respond on our behalf, and I'd like to suggest we include the corridor along the 401 in that, our response.
Okay, so maybe we'll do the motion because I want to have some discussion on that. So can I get a seconder for Councillor Spillis, Councillor Goida? Okay, I'll open up to Councillor Roth if you have any comments.
What is the motion?
The motion is give the authority to CAO and the mayor to sign a letter basically endorsing whatever comments they plan to make, and also include in that letter our request that the province consider the commercial industrial corridor on either side of the 401.
Up to 2 kilometers was your initial one, right?
Yeah. Would you like me to, if I may, make council aware of what the previous council resolution was on that matter? Is that helpful? Sure. Okay. So I'll read it in its entirety. Sorry, it's a little long. But whereas Council passed Resolution 2016-251 at its meeting held on June 15, 2016, in support of the County of Wellington Planning Committee comments on proposed changes to provincial plans dated June 9th, 2016, and wherein the expansion of the Greenbelt into Wellington County was not supported, and whereas the proposed changes to the provincial plans, the Greenbelt Plan, recommends an expansion of the Greenbelt Plan area in southern Wellington County and includes the township of Puss Lynch, and whereas the province has emphasized the importance of residential and employment corridors next to transportation and transit corridors, and whereas Highway 401 is a major transportation and economic development corridor, now therefore be it resolved, should the province proceed with the expansion of the Greenbelt Plan area in Puss Lynch, the township recommends that lands within 2 kilometers of the Highway 401 corridor and Highway 6 be specifically excluded from the current and proposed Greenbelt Plan area to accommodate and develop employment lands.
Can I just ask Ms. Wilhelm a question? You mentioned there was some conversation about the Greenbelt, and it was said, and what were your comments about that?
Oh, the thing that they said 3 times?
Yeah, sternly.
This does not involve the Greenbelt Plan. This amendment does not involve the Greenbelt Plan. So
They're not going to revise it, they're not going to change it.
none of the changes in this amendment apply to the Greenbelt Plan, and where they do have references to the Greenbelt Plan, it's to protect what's already defined within it. So what I can understand from what Karen has just read is that the township made those comments at the time when the province was looking at expanding the Greenbelt beyond where it is now. That hasn't happened, so it's still set the way it was in 2004 or 6. So I think those comments would need to change if you wanted to make that comment again, because this is related to the growth plan, the amendment that we're looking at.
So we'll open it up to questions again, I guess.
Well, I still would like to suggest my motion.
Yeah.
And we include this industrial zone, commercial industrial zone on the 401 corridor.
I'm just looking at Google Maps, and 2 kilometers is pretty significant. That almost takes it, is it 2 kilometers with south and then 2 kilometers north for your motion? Or is it 2 kilometers inclusive, the middle being the highway? Because if it's 2 kilometers
Well,
south.
I was assuming a kilometer on each side.
Okay.
That was
because
my assumption.
there's a big difference in the
Absolutely,
land mass there. And is it primarily, that motion, is it based on industrial? We're looking at industrial growth, or?
Industrial commercial.
Because, I mean, there is a residential component in there. right? We
I
have- we
understand
have
that.
a village,
I
right?
understand you can't do it everywhere, but certainly you can rezone it and let the,
We had a seconder from Councillor Goyda, so questions and comments on Councillor Spoulos' motion?
I would support it.
Councillor Ballmer?
Well, my only concern is that it's the previous motion was intended to preserve the rights we currently have if they expanded the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt's not proposed to be expanded, therefore we still have the same rights as we had before, and that motion was intended to achieve. So to me, we're looking at passing a motion to have the same rights as we have now, even though nobody's proposing to change anything. If we want to preserve those for employment lands, we should approach the county and seek them to be redesignated in the official plan as employment lands, and then we can rezone them. We don't need the permission of the province at this point to designate those as employment lands, unless we have a surplus of employment lands countywide. Stop me at any time, Madam Planner, if I'm off base here, but I guess if we want to do something here, we should maybe talk to the county about, is there a surplus of employment lands in the county? And if there aren't, should we designate them, and take the bull by the horns and designate them ourselves? And then it's up to us whether they're employment lands or not. Asking the province to, I just don't understand what we're trying to achieve here. Since the Greenbelt didn't expand, we've got every opportunity we want still. We're not losing anything.
well, I guess a question of our county planner. What is your opinion of the suggestion by Council Bowman? In other words, we leave it up to you to do all the necessary legwork and to designate these as employment lands, and we go forward on that basis, or is it better to alert the province that this is our desire to have this?
Well, I think the changes that they're making to the growth plan that relate to what you're looking to do, I don't think there's a match, because when we've been, we've mapped where your rural employment areas are, and that might be something that we might want to ask them to consider, making one of those zones that they talk about, significant employment zones, but it's already designated land. I think what you're asking to do here is to, a lot of those lands are they're natural features or prime agricultural land, and that is beyond the scope of that amendment. Yeah, and it's been a while, but we did report to council, that would be through Mark Pally, about the fact that at the time that he reported a number of years ago, there is a surplus of employment land, and we have to measure it across the county. So, but through the municipal comprehensive review, which we're obligated as of the current amendment to finish up by 2022, that's something that we would have to look at again.
So I'll withdraw that part of the motion and just give the CAO and the mayor the authority to review your submission and endorse it or amend it as you feel necessary. That's the township.
Brilliant.
All in favor? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. So we still have to just take a vote. No, you're fine.
Okay.
Fine, we just have to take a vote on her report, so I'll read it again. It's been a while. So moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Ballmer, that the Wellington County Report Amendment 1 to the Growth Plan 2017 be received for information that council supports the change as outlined in the report. All in favor? Carried. Okay, what's next, Madame CAO?
Verbal update from Don.
Okay, we have a verbal update from the Director of Public Works. Speech.
Yeah. I just wanted to give council a brief update on some challenges that we've been having in the Public Works Department in relation to, obviously, the weather since the start of the new year and dealing with some equipment issues that we're also dealing with. The last few weeks have been extremely difficult and hard on equipment. And we've had some significant repairs that have had to be done to our equipment. We've had an engine compartment fire in one truck. We've had a electrical fire in a cab on another truck. We've had fuel system issues. We've had rear end issues on graders. So we've had a lot of repairs that have happened over the last couple of weeks, which is fine. I mean, this type of weather is hard on equipment. It's just the nature of the business. But when we have to ship one of these trucks out right now, on average, we're losing that piece of equipment for 7 days, which really affects how we deliver our service to our residents in this type of weather. So what that means is different planning, different strategies, and using different pieces of equipment that you normally would not use for that function. So entail, certain pieces of equipment can only be run by certain operators, so not only is that significant, but there's also a cost component to that as overtime goes because of certain people that can only run that equipment. I'm not gonna get into a lot of the detail with it. I mean, we're struggling with it. We're still missing one piece of equipment, to date. Hopefully, word I got late today is we may see it back tomorrow. The biggest, thing I wanted to stress to council tonight is that going forward with vehicle maintenance at this stage for 6 weeks into the season, where we've already used 40% of the budget line item for repairs. So just something I just wanted to bring that forward so council's aware as we go through the rest. We've got a long way to go for the rest of the season, and there's obviously mandatory inspections that also has to be done to this equipment that can range in the thousands of dollars as well. So it's been a tough slug for the first go of the week, but like I said, we're getting by, and we're using different strategies and different planning techniques and staging staff, different kind of hours. Staff has been very accommodating on going outside their normal working hours to help achieve and provide the service to our residents. So basically, it was more the funding issue that I wanted to bring to light to where we stand right now.
Okay, thank you, Director. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I'll make you start. Councillor Roth?
No, I have no questions.
Councillor Ballmer?
Yeah, you said one truck's still out of service. How close is it to the end of its useful life or planned replacement for a vehicle? Is that one of our older ones or?
Currently, the one we're still without is 2011. It is the oldest truck fleet or truck equipment that we have. In the fleet management policy, I believe it's 8 to 10 years, but to go at 8 years would be a council decision. To go that way, it basically comes out to providing a business case to say we're gonna deal it earlier than anticipated of the 10 years. Nowhere in the study was there a trigger factor in that regard to say, you know, what is the trigger for council to say, okay, we want to deal it in 8
Oh, okay.
type of deal, so.
Is it,
Anything at 8 years, before the old fleet policy, it was automatic at 8 years. Now, it's not automatic anymore, it has to be brought back to council.
if I could, Mr. Chair, I seem to recall there was something, like, this asset management plan sure comes in handy lately. We get to talk about it a lot. There was some discussion, I seem to recall, on the service levels that they recommended. There was something that did mention our fleet management plan. Based on what you're telling me, would it be possible to, prior to passing our asset management plan, could we maybe have a look at those policies before we adopt it, so that, you know, now we're gone to trying to keep things past 8 years, and we're seeing how that's working out. Would it be something you could come back with a recommendation as to whether that service level policy that was recommended for regarding fleet maintenance or fleet replacement is working for us before we adopt it?
And Mary, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the asset management plan, the fleet part of it just mirrored the current management policy that's.
Fleet management policy, yeah.
That's in there. Is it possible to maybe put some triggers in there? I would think there probably would be. They'd have to have some discussions with the consultants on that.
I just, because I know, my God, the worst time for something to break is when you need it, but that's the only time it ever breaks. And it only gets worse the older it gets. So I'm just, if it used to be 8 years and we've tried to do 8 to 10, but this 8 to 10 is showing us to be a bit of a problem. Maybe we should re-examine that 8 to 10 section, and I guess I'm looking for direction. Where do we go to get that? If we think it's not working, do we just, okay, say it's 8 to 8 years now, or maybe we go to, 8 years seemed to work before.
I'm not sure what the answer would be on this one.
I think if we see the maintenance costs year after year increasing, it might take some time to get that information. This might just be an
anomaly?
unique anomaly, right? And it's just not great timing for us. And you can have brand new equipment that breaks.
Yes, true enough.
It's just a terrible situation, bad winter, and but I think that goes to speak of the asset management plan being a live document and being reviewed, and it's something I think our director, whether it be Mr. Creed or whoever succeeds him, would come with that recommendation to council that this is not working, or this truck is cost us too much money. It's time for us
Time to go.
Time to go. So I think that would. Councillor Guida?
Yeah, I would agree that it sucks for sure that everything's breaking down right now, but maybe it is just, it's been terrible winter for ice, especially worse than I ever can remember, and I can imagine that the ice is way more difficult on the equipment than just regular snow. And so, I can appreciate that you're coming up with these alternate strategies and finding other ways of getting the job done using equipment that's not necessarily meant to be used to get the job done. But I have to commend you that you're figuring it out with whatever you have available. But I don't know that it necessarily warrants us saying, well, we need to replace the equipment because it's costing us too much to repair. I think we need to kind of let it play out a little bit and see how is this just a specific situation related to this really not so great winter we're having, or is this an ongoing issue? So
Yeah, in no way was it my intent to say we need to start replacing equipment. It was more just to bring to light the funding aspect of where we're at now, going forward into the next, 10 months.
I have no questions regarding Mr. Creed's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Creed. All right, so we have the rec department, we have nothing on that. Mayor's update, just see that we've keep receiving updates on the Mill Creek spill and the cleanup that's going on with it, and we're still posting them on our website. And again, I think they're struggling with the weather. I don't have anything else other than that right now. I'm attending the Good Roads Association this weekend, and I think I'll try to maybe bend the ear of a couple ministers if I can catch them out in the open, which would be a good opportunity just to voice our concerns, see if I can be successful in that. Okay, so no committee meeting minutes, we have none. Municipal announcements, anything? Councillor Roth?
I have nothing.
Councillor Bulmer?
Nope, nothing.
Councillor Guida?
I would just like to say that I was at the Family Day Winter Classic. At least on the Monday I was. I wasn't there on the Saturday and Sunday, but it was fantastic weather for the event this year. The sun was shining, there was fresh snow, it wasn't too cold, so they had a really good turnout. I think it was a really good event. There was several people from the city of Guelph who came and brought their kids, so I thought that was good because the word has clearly gotten out to them as well. And so I thought that was a really well done event. And I'm not exactly sure if this is the appropriate time to bring it up, but I just did want to mention, as it relates to the oil spill, we had a Friends of Mill Creek meeting today, and I just wanted to mention that Chris Wren, who is the consulting biologist for Dufferin Aggregates, I did speak to. I know that we, as council, were talking about it previously, and we're wondering if the ministry had all of the monitoring and the information that Dufferin Aggregates had access to. And he did confirm today that he had sent through all of their data to the Ministry of Environment, and that he's also been in contact with Stantec. He did mention that they were having some similar experiences as we were initially having at the township in sort of not getting phone calls returned and kind of getting conflicting information from the ministry. But they are going to echo what we did and send a letter to the ministry to ask that they also be kept abreast of updates and things like that. So just to let everyone know.
I have no municipal announcement.
Okay, thank you. Any unfinished business? Seeing none. Into bylaws. Moved by Councillor Bulmer, seconded by Councillor Roth, that the following bylaw be taken as read 3 times and finally passed in open council. A, bylaw to adopt the budget for the Corporation Township of Puslinch for the year 2019. All in favor? Carried. I'm going to read the press release for the budget. Puslinch Council approves 2019 budget. Puslinch, the Council of the Township of Puslinch approved its 2019 operating capital budget with a 3.32 tax increase for the typical Puslinch residents of $593,250. The increase represents a $31.96 annual increase. The increase per 100,000 assessment value is approximately $5.39 annually. Taking into account the County of Wellington's 2019 budget and the 2018 education rate, the blended tax impact for the typical Puslinch residents of $590,250 is 1.73%, or $96.37 annually. The blended tax increase per 100,000 of assessment value is approximately $16.24 annually. Puslinch Council has passed a responsible budget that continues to focus on our key priorities. That's a comment from myself.
Good.
Taxes on a typical, do you want me to read the whole? No. I can, okay. All right, so we pass that bylaw.
So now your confirmatory bylaw.
Confirmatory bylaw. All right, moved by Councillor Roth, seconded by Councillor Bulmer, that the following bylaw be taken as read 3 times and finally passed in open council. Bylaw 011-2019 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council for the Corporation of the Township of Puslinch at its meeting held on the 20th day of February 2019. All in favor? Read. This is the good one. Moved by Councillor Bulmer, seconded by Councillor Roth. The council hereby adjourns at 9:09 p.m. All in favor? Carried.
go.